Good morning. Good morning. I am Pastor Brett Stevens. I'm the discipleship pastor here. Our lead pastor, Tony, is on a much-needed vacation with his family, and we're excited for him. So here I am. And have you guys ever heard of senioritis? All right, some people know what I'm talking about. You know, we just had graduation, right? And so senioritis is this term that's applied to the way in which people in their last year of school lose their motivation to really work on the school, right? And so if you've been through this experience, you might know what I'm talking about, or if you have children who just graduated, you know what I'm talking about. I have the dubious honor of having been in my last year of school 3 times. Yay for me, woo! And interestingly, as you get older, the problem doesn't go away. It still is difficult to motivate yourself when you are so close to the end of something. And you've probably experienced the same thing, perhaps when you're about to transition to a new job. You know, you've turned in your 2 weeks notice, the new job is lined up, you're excited about this new opportunity, and you still have to go for 2 more weeks to that other job, knowing there's another exciting job lined up here, and you're just kind of wrapping things up. And it's hard to be motivated when you know what's coming next, and what's coming next is really, really exciting. And that's an interesting part of our lives. Our human experience very much involves this continuous cycle of moving to new things. You know, when Lydia and I got married, our life was a little bit turbulent. We had just graduated from college, and we just got married, and each year new things would happen. We were changing jobs, we had children, and every year we were like, you know, we're in a pretty good groove. I think this is going to be the year where it just kind of settles down. I'm not there yet. I'll let you know when it actually does settle down, or maybe some of you guys can tell me when I should expect it to finally settle down. That's our life. That is our experience. A continuous movement to new things. And it's difficult because some of these things are things that we're really excited about. Sometimes the journey to get there is one that we're less excited about. And when you're caught in the middle in that difficult, challenging time working towards something exciting, it can be hard. It can be even harder, though, when the thing you're working toward doesn't have a deadline. That someday that's going to happen, but I'm not sure when. Someday things will get better, but I just don't know. And doubly so when we're experiencing hardships in life, when we're experiencing grief and loss. We can know cognitively that it won't last forever. It'll get better. The pain will lessen. The situation will improve, but waiting on that when it will happen, it's hard. It's hard. We want to look at the life of David. We've been doing that as part of this series. And David had kind of an interesting situation. So for those of you who are not familiar, David was the 2nd king of Israel. And his kingship was kind of a rocky start, see, because the first king, Saul, did not obey God and was told through the prophet that his kingship would be given to another person. Now, if you know anything about kings in the ancient world, or really anyone who's given a large amount of power, they don't really like when they're told that you're going to lose all of that and somebody else is going to take your place. Somebody else is going to get your job, your position, your authority. So Saul obviously didn't take this news great. And then David was anointed king, was told, you are going to be king, while Saul was still alive and king. And Saul obviously didn't take this well either and tried to kill David multiple times. And so David took a group of people loyal to him and kind of spent many years living out in the wilderness, hiding in caves, and kind of basically not being near Saul so that he wouldn't be killed by Saul until finally he would eventually become king. Well, periodically, Saul got this idea in mind that if he could just kill David, David wouldn't take the kingship from him. And so he would gather his army and go rampaging through the wilderness trying to find David. And that's where the story picks up, is in one of these episodes. After Saul had returned from fighting the Philistines, he was told that David had gone into the wilderness of En-Gedi. Can we go to the next slide? There we go. So Saul chose 3,000 elite troops from all Israel and went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats. At the place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. But as it happened, David and his men were hiding farther back in that very cave. "Now's your opportunity," David's men whispered to him. "Today the Lord is telling you, I will certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish." So David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him." So David restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. After Saul had left the cave and gone on his way, David came out and shouted after him, "My lord the king!" And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. Then he shouted to Saul, "Why do you listen to the people who say, 'I am trying to harm you'? This very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true, for the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you, for I said, 'I will never harm the king. He is the Lord's anointed one.' Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It is a piece of the hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves that I am not trying to harm you and that I have not sinned against you, even though you have been hunting for me to kill me." When David had finished speaking, Saul called back, "Is that really you, my son David?" Then he began to cry. And he said to David, "You are a better man than I am, for you have repaid me good for evil. Yes, you have been amazingly kind to me today, for when the Lord put me in a place where you could have killed me, you didn't do it." Who else would let his enemy get away when he had him in his power? May the Lord reward you well for the kindness you have shown me today. And now I realize that you are surely going to be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will flourish under your rule. So here we have this bizarre story, and there are a few elements here that I want to explain to make sense of kind of the behavior, because some of these ideas are not present in our culture in the same way. And so his behavior seems really strange. The way that he's upset about even cutting off Saul's robe, and he keeps talking about how he was chosen, even though David has already been anointed as king as well. And so what's going on here is that the ancient world believed that the role of the king was appointed by God or the gods, depending on which country you were part of. And so the king was specially chosen, and to go against the king was essentially to go against God or the gods, was to reject the natural order of the world. And so kingship was seen as a very sacred thing. And that is why David is so upset about this, or so torn about the idea of hurting Saul, because even though he knows he's supposed to be king, he also perceives a world in which Saul, as the king, is especially appointed to that role. And so he's hesitant to hurt him, to try to take it for himself, because of how special he perceives that role to be. And so in this sort of bizarre set of circumstances, he essentially just demonstrates without harming Saul that he could have had he chosen. And then Saul recognizes that David really obviously is not trying to hurt him, because he could have. He had the option and chose not to. But what's so interesting about this, right, is the way that David responds. Because David has been promised that he will be king. This is an enormous promise, a very this is sort of a huge promotion, if you want to look at it like that he's been given this great promise, but he's not been told when he'll be king. And now it seems he has the moment. It's finally time. He can become king. Saul will be gone, and David will step up. But he chooses not to take it. You see, he perceives that if he were to seize this in his own power, that it would not be God giving it to him, but him taking it for himself. And there is, in the ancient world, a long history of people trying to take the kingship for themselves by force. Instead, he believes that God will deliver the kingship to him without a violent contest. More practically speaking, we might say David recognized the reality that if he were to kill Saul and take the kingship in that way, his kingship would be forever contested. That people would look at him as an usurper, that he only claimed the throne through violence. And so the thing that he would try to take because it had been promised him would forever be something that he had to fight to keep. And it is this sort of ironic moment that often in our own attempts to take the things that we believe we are due, that we have earned, that we have worked for, that have been promised to us, when you take them in the wrong way, they aren't really yours. So this is David's experience, right? And he is rightfully appointed king. He is rightfully expecting it to come, and yet he doesn't have it yet. But what about our own lives? We experience the same tension. Sometimes we have things that we are due, that we are owed, that we have rightfully worked for, but we don't have them. Instead, we experience hardship and frustration. We have things that we expect that others will do for us or support us, or that we can reasonably achieve. And we work towards those, but they don't quite come. And so we feel frustration. We feel upset. We feel stressed. So I want to draw two lessons out from this story, from David's experience. The first of these, I want to make a distinction. Can we go to the next slide? Oh no. I thought I had cleared that, but apparently I did not. It's all right, they'll get it sorted out in a minute. So the first lesson is you can't control your situation, but you can control your response. And here's the critical point about this. I want to make a distinction between stress and pressure. Tony talked about this last week, but I want to make this distinction clear. Pressure is the situation that you experience. It is all of the factors that are pushing on you. Those are pressure. But I'm sure some of you can recognize that there are people, that there are jobs, that there are ways of life that seem to experience a lot of pressure, and yet the person who lives them is not stressed. I'll give you an example. Working in food service. My wife worked as a barista and loved it. She loved rush hour more than anything else, with people coming and going and making all these drinks and just busy, 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 busy. I worked at an ice cream shop, and I hated it. I especially hated rush hour. It made me stressed. The same situation did not make Lydia stressed. We experienced the same pressure, the hurry, the people needing things, a lot of tasks to be done and not much time to do them. We experienced the same pressures, but one of us was stressed and one of us wasn't. You see, the pressure that you experience, the situations in your life, you may not be able to control. But stress is within you. Stress is something that is your response to that situation. And you can control your response. And I don't mean this in a way of saying, if you're stressed, it's your fault. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, recognize the difference between what you can control and what you can't. There are parts of your situation, things going on in your life, demands that people have on you that you cannot change. But, like David, you have choices that you can make. David was faced with a lot of pressure. People who were looking up to him saying, "You're supposed to be king. Come on, seize your moment." Saul hunting him, trying to kill him, living out in the caves in the wilderness. Pressure pushing on him. But he had a choice to make in that moment, and in many moments before and after. And he said, I trust what God is doing. I trust his process. I trust his timing. I believe that if I take this now, it will not be good. It will not be right. So he made a conscious choice on what he would do. And you too will find yourself with pressure pushing on your life, with demands from people, with people saying, come on, do this, join us, now's your moment. And you too will have the choice. How will you respond? How will you respond? The second lesson I want us to learn: what God is doing in you matters more than what God is doing around you. Now, if you know Calvin and Hobbes, I want to be clear that this is not what I mean. The next slide. And if you can see that, this is Calvin pretending to be his dad, and he says, Calvin, go do something you hate. Being miserable builds character. God is not saying that to you. God is not saying, I'm going to put you through terrible things because it builds character. It's good for you. What I mean is this: the situation that you're experiencing, the pressure that you're experiencing, and your response to it is developing something in you. You are becoming something. You are growing, you are learning, you are developing, and that process is critical. God is doing something in you. And if you try to bypass what God is doing in you to get to the thing that you want, it won't really be the thing that you want. You won't be the person who is ready to do it. We'll use David as an example. Had he seized the kingship at the wrong moment, he would not have been the king that God needed him to be. That he grew to be the king that led Israel in this powerful and monumental way through the challenges he experienced. Let me put it for you another way. The writer of the letter of Hebrews said, it is right, fitting, appropriate that the author of our salvation would become perfect through suffering. In other words, Jesus himself became through his hardship, through his experiences. And here's the truth, the hard truth. Many of you, I'm sure, already know this, even if you can't put it into words. You will grow the most, you will develop the most, you will become better the most through hardship and not easy times. It is through your pain that you become most like Christ. The author of our salvation was made perfect through suffering. C.S. Lewis said it like this: pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. God whispers to us in our pleasures, and he shouts to us in our pain. The hardship that we experience, the tension, the pull, the pressure between what we are now and that promised thing, the good future, the thing that we're working towards, the thing we're hoping for, the thing that is still coming, is what makes us who we are. You know, when Lydia and I first moved to Angola, we did not have jobs lined up. So we kind of moved here on hopes and prayers. And that first summer was hard. Looking for work, we didn't have much money. We struggled a lot. And we had people who supported us, and we were so appreciative. But to this day, we recognize that that experience has made us more compassionate, more generous, and more able to trust God. We still talk about that few-month period. It had a profound impact on us. It formed us into the people that we are today. And so I push at this point. What God is doing in you matters so much more than what God is doing around you. I often say it like this: when we die, there will be two things that we get to take with us: our relationships and our character. And that should put our lives in perspective. That the person that we are becoming, the relationships that we develop, these are the most critical things. What God is doing in us. And so I encourage you today, as you are caught in between what you are and where you're going, to not rush ahead of God, to not seize what God has offered to you, but to take the process one step at a time, to allow the journey to change you, to shape you, to mold you, and to trust in a God who is working everything together for good. Let me pray for you as the team comes up to sing the last song. Holy God, today we are caught in the middle of where we've been and where you're leading us. And we're so anxious to see the better things you have ahead. We're so anxious to get there. Lord, give us patience to wait on your timing, to experience the journey that you have for us. Holy God, today will you begin to shape us into the people you have called us to be. Grow us, change us, teach us. Your Son, the author of our salvation, was made perfect through suffering. So Lord, we pray that like him, we can be perfected through our hardships. That all of the challenges, the pains, the loss, the grief we experience will come together to make us something beautiful. Will make us able to serve you better, to love your people and your creation better. That we can be your instruments of change and healing for other people. Holy God, will you change us today? Will you use us today? We ask this in the holy name of your Son, Jesus.